Hello, my name is Stephanie, and I'm introducing Bryan Fotino. Today is May 13, around 6:30 p.m., and we're going to start this meeting. Bryan Fotino is a tenant organizer at Catholic Migration Services. Hello, Bryan, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I want to start with this interview about you and how did you start in activism, and also I prepared some questions for you. Let me know with the one you feel comfortable to answer. And also, I want to thank you so much for the time you are spending for this interview. And how you feeling?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to talk and answer any questions you have. Um, to give a little bit more about my how I got into activism. Um, so I actually so my first like big job out of college was doing homeless outreach in the streets of Midtown Manhattan. We would be driving around in a little car talking to people experiencing homelessness and trying to connect them with housing. Um, So I did that for a year, and then I did case management for a year. And in that role, I was working with tenants in the Lower East Side and downtown Brooklyn, who were at risk of eviction to try to keep them in their homes, but direct services. And I didn't really like that work. Like I like being able to help people, of course, but I didn't like that for every person you were able to help, there were like 20 other people in the same situation who would come to your office the next day, or that you would. And the thing is, these jobs were so focused on helping individual people, but they weren't focused on helping communities and bringing communities together to change their circumstances. So I kind of realized that I didn't want to be doing that work. So I looked for something that was like kind of related, but more organizing. And that's
Okay.
why I found tenant organizing. So I've been doing this job for almost 3 years now. It'll like 2.5 years. Um, and I love this type of work because not only am I able to like bring tenants together in their buildings to fight their landlords, to win repairs, to end harassment, but I also get to bring communities together to fight for changes on an even larger level, like a city level or statewide level, and really change the structures that are causing so many people to deal with the violence of eviction, the violence of homelessness, the violence of housing instability, and more.
it, it looks like you started getting a lot of experience, and also like you being in college, and then after that you start developing more your career going through this type of job. Also, I'm interested about what is inspire you to become involved with the tenants and about this tenants organization.
I mean, honestly, it was just like chance. Like, I was just interested in social justice in general. And the first job I happened to get the first big job I happened to get out of college was in tenants' rights, or it was like housing related. And I graduated college during like the height of COVID, so there weren't many options. So I didn't have that much of a choice. But I am really glad that I did get to continue in this field because I think um, it's like the I would say it's like the primary site of the fight for social justice because it's like we're the vast majority of us are spending our evenings, spending our nights, waking up, where we spend a lot of the day. So it's like it's where people are at, and there is such a huge fight for justice that can be had where people are at because landlords suck. They're like taking advantage of tenants either by denying them repairs or taking them to housing court, and the landlord has the attorney, but the tenant doesn't. Or even like things that are so normal, like just paying rent to the landlord every month. It's like the landlord has probably made enough money to pay back the mortgage and then some. So even that can be considered violence because it's like they're doing it for profit instead of for housing their tenants, which is like what housing should be for, at least in my mind.
Okay. So hearing you what you're saying about it, um, like have you experienced any personal connection to housing issues? I'm not sure if by you or probably by Rose.
I mean, yeah, like I was saying, just the fact that, you have to pay rent every month, that you don't have ownership over your apartment. Like I'm paying every month a huge amount of money, and I'm never going to have the rights to keep this apartment. The landlord can decide, and especially because it's market rate, the landlord can just decide to kick me out at will. So that's definitely a housing issue. But I've also experienced things like repair violations, Like my elevator has broken down multiple times and I've had to like walk up 6 flights of stairs. I had an issue where the sink was clogged and I kept trying to reach out to the landlord and they kept refusing to fix it. It was only when I reached out to 311 that I was able to get them to take it seriously. And then I'm trying to think what other housing issues I've dealt with. Um, I mean, a big one has been not being able to fully decide where I want to live. Like I was living in Hell's Kitchen um
4 years?
for 2 years,
Okay.
but I was basically due to circumstances beyond my control, I couldn't stay there. I had to leave the neighborhood. Then I was in Midtown East for a year, and due to circumstances beyond my control, this time the landlord was raising the rent too high. I couldn't stay in the neighborhood. So then I had to move here to Brooklyn. So it's like I feel like I'm constantly being pushed around
Moving
to different
around.
places. And every time I like a neighborhood and I feel like it's my home, I'm like forced to move again. So yeah, I have dealt with housing issues. I don't want to say they're like as anywhere near as severe as like the people some of the stories I've heard from the people I work with because they're dealing with like this times 10. But I do feel like this is something that is personal to me too. And I think, my life would be better, everybody's lives would be better for the most part if housing was a human right and not something that is just for money.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad you couldn't share part of your personal life going through tenants organization, and I believe that also um motivate you to going through this profession. Um, I have another question. Let me go through it. How do you and your organization support tenants and who are facing eviction or harassment?
Good question. So eviction, so my organization, we have a few tenant lawyers who are able to represent tenants in housing court. Um, Unfortunately, I mean, as you know, there's like a crisis where over 82,000 tenants have been denied their right to counsel since January 2022. So
Correct.
there are tenants who we're not able to support because our attorneys are already so busy with their other cases, and the courts are calendaring cases too quickly to give our attorneys and other attorneys a chance to catch up. So in that circumstance, we help by like organizing, so connecting tenants with things like court packing actions where we've gotten like a group of tenants to go to court with the tenant to support them and demand that they get more time in their case or demand that they get an attorney. And that's worked a few times. Obviously, looping tenants into our coalition work for the Right to Counsel campaign. So fighting for statewide right to counsel legislation, fighting for clean hands legislation, and that includes things like lobby meetings, rallies, um, filming content for social media. And then we also there's something like called eviction blockades. So if a tenant is being evicted, I haven't organized one at CMS, but other tenant orgs in the city have done it. But basically, if a tenant is being evicted, if the marshal's coming, they'll show up. A group of tenants will show up to the eviction to try to persuade the marshal to leave or physically prevent the marshal from evicting the tenant. And these are just some of the ways to defend against evictions off the top of my head, but there's totally more. And then for harassment, um, same thing. So my organization will sometimes represent tenants in affirmative cases where they're suing their landlord for repair violations for harassment. We also represent entire buildings that are choosing to sue their landlord. So I've helped organize buildings that have gone on to collectively sue their landlord to get repairs to end harassment. That's worked. Uh, and then just other things the tenant association can do to end harassment. So things like a a rally to call attention to the issue, a sign-on letter, getting elected officials involved is something we're doing now. Uh, and yeah, there's more, but I'll just leave it at that for now.
Right. And I know, like for May 21st, there is a rally coming up when we're gonna support tenants in East Harlem to freeze rent. Is that correct?
Yeah, so hundreds of tenants throughout the city are coming together to call on all of the candidates in the mayoral election to support a rent freeze. So right now, only Zohran Mamdani has committed to a 4-year rent freeze. Some of the other candidates have committed to like some version of a rent freeze or do not support a rent freeze. We're making the demand that all of the candidates in this race support tenants by supporting a rent freeze for rent stabilized tenants. And we're also going to be like trying to make sure one of those candidates who supports a rent freeze wins the election so we can actually like have it.
Okay, yeah, that's like a good movement. Would be great that also can be in all the counties of New York, and hopefully at some point it comes a reality. Okay, let's go to another question. Do you see gentrification affecting long-time residents and low-income communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the most visible um sign is that tenants are being forced out of their apartments. Long-term tenants are being forced out of their apartments. Like I was door knocking in a building owned by the landlord Bronstein um a few weeks ago or last week maybe, and the tenant there was telling me that there are a lot of longer term tenants who Bronstein is trying to force them out, either by taking them through housing court, like the formal eviction process, by denying repairs, so the conditions are so bad they just have to leave, um, through like illegal rent overcharges, so that they can't afford the
The
rent.
increasing
Yeah, they're
all
increasing
over.
beyond what's allowed by the law potentially. And then the tenant ends up in housing court at like no fault of their own, or they just, end up paying huge amounts of rent and then are struggling to afford other things they need to survive. So basically, this is I think, most direct impact of gentrification that I'm seeing, that long-term tenants are either struggling to stay in their homes and their communities, or they've already been forced out. And I know like tens of thousands of people have had to leave New York City, have had to leave their buildings, their communities because it's gotten too expensive or it just wasn't like quality housing. And New York City is no longer their home. And I feel like we've like lost just so much like to gentrification and specifically to landlord abuse.
Wow, that's like very impressive. I think not on those days, like we see a lot of people struggling with rent increasing to the point that they cannot afford anymore. And also, I think something that probably we couldn't work on it is about people who's living in a place for at least, I don't know, like over 20 years, and for some reason at some point these landlords sell the property, and then it becomes this new landlord, and they over increase the rent. And I think it should be also like a right for those type of tenants who had through this whole years, they like provide their income, and it's like they also should have like a right, a decision, at least a time frame when they can settle down where they're gonna move, and not just like for one uh, month to the next month being communicated. And like I think that's like something really bad and shocking for people who live at some place for a long time.
Totally agree. And there's actually a bill that we're fighting for that kind of relates to that. It's called the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And what this would do is if the landlord is selling the building, it would give tenants they would have the first chance out of anybody to buy the building that they live in. So
Yeah,
if the tenants can get organized, can maybe work with a community org to put together a good offer, then they have the potential to become owners of their housing. And, then they can decide how much is
the
the monthly
property
fee going
value.
to be? Yeah, how much, are we going to invest in repairs? And that, could be a path for long-term tenants to come together and be more secure in their housing because now they know that a landlord is not going to come in and evict them or raise the rent on them or deny them repairs because they are the owners of the building. There is no landlord.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, Brian. Let me ask you this: what role do landlords, developers, and city policies play in the current housing crisis?
Well, I mean, landlords are responsible. Like I already outlined, they are overcharging on rent, they're denying repairs, they're harassing tenants, they're evicting long-term tenants, and just evicting tenants in general. So landlords are responsible for the issues that tenants are facing. Developers, uh, so one big issue with developers is that they are building housing that is unaffordable. So they're coming into communities and they are building housing that people can't afford and pricing out these longer term tenants. Uh, or the longer term tenants are staying, but then they're struggling to get by. So developers also, in general, I would say, have a huge responsibility or a huge role in the issues that tenants are facing. Um, and city policies definitely as well. For example, Mayor Adams' city of Yes recently passed, and that basically gave developers the go-ahead to develop more all throughout New York City with very little affordable housing built into the plan or tenant protections. So elected officials at in the city government, whether the mayor, the city council, are definitely very supportive of developers, and are giving, yeah, the go-ahead for developers to take advantage of our communities. Also, yeah, tenant protections like uh, the city government, and in particular, the mayor is largely responsible, is like failing to fund right to counsel in New York City so that there are enough tenant attorneys and that every tenant can get an attorney in housing court. There's about, like, I believe, a $300 million deficit in funding right to counsel citywide. And yeah, it's because the city government officials and the state government officials are receiving a lot of donations from the real estate industry, including from REBNY. So it's, they're corrupt and they're not out here fully supporting the
Helping.
tenants. Yeah, they're out here supporting the landlords, the developers in the real estate industry.
Yeah, that's very like a devastating reality that all of us live and the majority of people live at, going every day in New York City and see the way that like having all the resources that we couldn't use for, but it's not
Hmm.
like we are so limited to be part of it. So
Yeah, it's like this is the city in the world with the most billionaires, yet we're dealing with like struggling to afford our rent, people not having a roof over their heads. And you can like, see every day there's new like buildings being developed, being built, and you know that this is, I mean, the vast majority of them are not affordable housing. Like I would never be able to buy one of the units in these buildings that are going up, but they're still going up and they're contributing to this crisis and this inequality.
yes, yes, really agree with what you're saying. Um, so talking about like a good side of it, what strategies have proven most effective in your advocacy? Legal action, protest, etc.
All of the above. Legal action definitely. Like I have seen when tenants have come together to sue their landlord for repairs, it works, or it has worked. The judge has ordered the landlord to make the repairs. Um, like rallies, I have seen some results as well. For example, we've had rallies targeting, or we had one rally targeting Bronstein, the landlord, as well as we did some other actions with that as well, like calling 311 and sign on letters from elected officials. But we did notice Bronstein making repairs after our community organizing efforts. Um, I mean, I think media is also important. Like, we have to get press about tenant stories and the abuses that they're facing and publish on social media what the tenants are going through. So, like, people are aware and we can change the narrative about tenants. And I'm trying to think what other strategies have been successful. Legislative has been successful. We won right to counsel on a city level. We're having trouble enforcing the law, but at least we have the law. We won the HISTPA law in 2019 that expanded protections for unstabilized tenants. We won good cause in last year, so expanding protections for market rate tenants. And then like a city like Kingston, they've used protesting and advocacy to push for a 15% rent rollback. So that's been effective. So yeah, I think yeah, all of these strategies that I named have had their successes.
Yes, and also something in particular that I remember you mentioned in one of the meetings that we have. It was like the history of each tenant. Like each tenant has a history, and sometimes people is ashamed of probably going through this whole situation. And for example, a building where there is a lot of tenants, when you start speak loud and you speak how you've been treating, like what is your history, how you been as tenant, it's like you can make a group of people when everyone is like you share the same experience, so together it becomes a powerful. So I think that's a good strategy too, when it becomes to those situations. You see tangible success from your efforts and also the organization efforts that we did.
Repairs for that building in Jackson Heights. We got repairs for some of the Bronstein buildings. Um, some of my colleagues have worked to get rent reductions for buildings that they've worked on. Also, I helped get tenants organized and lower the amount that the landlord was charging them for an MCI, a major capital improvement. So those are some tangible successes on like the building level. And then yeah, I also mentioned some like tangible successes on like a larger scale level, like passing right to council in the city, the HISTOPA law that passed in 2019, good cause that passed last year.
Like there is still so much more that we need to do. And like for example, what you think like as a tenant, we need to do in actions to move forward to have a better result.
I don't know if I have the answer. I'm trying to think.
Like for example, more commitment, like to try to be consistent and perseverant. Like if we are going for some goal in our neighborhood,
I
like
think,
try to don't drop
yeah,
it, because sometimes I see people who in the beginning is like they're strong and they really want to look at change, but at the end it's not going to take you like a week or a month. It will take you longer than that. So sometimes these people disappearing for different reasons. uh but I think if you will be in tied to this objective, it will be a reality at the end.
yeah. I think two issues or two like areas for improvement, and I'm sure there are others, but one is just getting tenants to organize their buildings. A lot of buildings in New York City, tenants don't talk to each other. They, like you were saying before, they have their own issues with the landlord, but they never talk to their neighbors and realize, oh, we're going through the same thing. We can team up and take on the landlord. Or maybe they are afraid of retaliation or super busy and don't have time, don't think they have time to organize their buildings. So I think that's a huge barrier, just the number of buildings that are not organized. Because think about what could happen if we organized every building and like had them coordinate. Like we could do like a citywide rent strike, for example, and really win some big things. Um, the second issue, I would say, I mean, it's kind of related, but just like there's not a huge amount of people who are involved in our legislative campaigns. I think that's changing. Like there has been a lot of tenants who've been getting involved in the rent freeze campaign, which is not legislative but electoral. Um, and like hundreds of tenants are coming to this rally on Thursday. But if we're going to really want change, we're going to consistently need like hundreds of people to show up. I think just to show that we are a powerful force and that each person in this movement can also be a leader, right? Like they can be doing things like leading actions or talking to the press or organizing their buildings. And, it's not just having more people for the sake of having more people, but it's having more people that can actually take on these roles and build community power. So I think if we could organize more buildings and get more people involved in like legislative and electoral campaigns, that could make a huge difference in making us more successful.
To leave a last message of your movement, your organization, your experience.
Yeah, I mean, just like what I was saying before, like I would recommend that everybody get organized. Like either um, talk to your neighbors in your building, especially if you're in a larger apartment building. If you have issues in your unit, see if your neighbors have the same issues. See if you can set up a meeting, uh, talk together about actions you can take to hold the landlord accountable. Like this is your right as a tenant living in New York City. You have the right to organize, the right to quality repairs, and you're paying rent, so you deserve it. And then the other thing would be to get involved in like community organizations that are pushing for things beyond just the building level. Because we're not going to win anything if we're all just only working in our own buildings. We have to build connections across our communities and fight to expand like the landscape of tenants' rights and to defend the rights we have. So if you have time at all, get involved, whether it's like in a community org fighting for tenants' rights, or if there are other issues that you're passionate about, like maybe getting involved in your union or fight for environmental justice. Whatever it is, it's super important that we all are active members of society that are pushing for things to get better and putting in the work. Because it's not going to get better if we just sit back and like maybe vote once or twice a year. Like that's not enough anymore. I mean, it's never been enough. But it's more clear than ever that that's not enough because that's gotten us to where we are now, which is like not in a good place. So if we want things to get better, we're all going to need to get involved and get our neighbors involved as well.
You for giving me the opportunity to give us this interview, and hoping all what we trying to get through it, it becomes truth. Thank you
Yes.
so much.